warm summer of 1986, a 12-year-old girl named Emily Grace Whitmore laced up her rollerblades, waved goodbye to her parents, and pushed off down the quiet suburban street toward her best friend's house. She never arrived. Hours passed before her absence rang alarm bells. Only after her friend's call did the truth begin to take shape. Emily was gone. No note, no witnesses. No signs of struggle, just gone. That summer afternoon became a black hole in the Whitmore family's life, a single moment that swallowed decades of peace, joy, and purpose. 20 years later, in a town far removed from the life they'd built and watched crumble, Robert and Helen Whitmore found themselves wandering through the sleepy streets of Fern Creek, Oregon. The afternoon light filtered through the dense web of ancient firs and maples overhead, bathing the cobblestone paths in gold. The town pulsed gently with weekend life. Artisans displaying handcrafted goods, local vendors offering samples of cheese and glistening berries, and laughter trailing behind young families with sticky-fingered toddlers. But for Robert, none of it mattered. He trailed behind Helen, stiff in posture and tight-lipped, as if the brightness of the day was an insult to his perpetual grief. "I still don't understand why we had to come here," he muttered under his breath, his voice low but weighted with frustration. 3 days in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by overpriced jam and dusty trinkets. Helen didn't flinch. She paused beside a pottery stall, her fingers brushing the rim of a sky-blue bowl, and took a slow breath that carried the ache of 2 decades. "Robert, please," she replied softly, the edge of wariness sharpening her tone. "It's a holiday, our first in a long time. Can't you just try?" It had taken years of whispered late-night pleas, of silent dinners in a house that had become a mausoleum of memories, for Helen to get Robert to agree to this trip. Since Emily's disappearance, time had not healed their wounds. It had only taught them how to limp through the pain. Their once vibrant home in Rockford, Illinois, had become a shrine to absence, every creak in the floorboards a cruel echo of laughter that would never return. Robert had shrunk into himself, armored by sorrow, living in loops, work, sleep, rehearse the day she vanished. He stopped living the moment Emily disappeared. To smile felt like betrayal, to laugh a sin. He was a man haunted, not by ghosts, but by the silence left behind. Helen, too, had suffered, but somewhere in the last year, a change, barely perceptible, but there, had begun to bloom within her. The rawness of grief dulled ever so slightly, giving way to the fragile belief that perhaps, just perhaps, they didn't have to remain lost forever. Emily wouldn't want them to. This trip, to a quiet town tucked between forest and sky, was her plea to the universe to bring back a flicker of light into Robert's eyes. As they walked down Main Street, Robert's eyes drifted without intention, scanning nothing in particular, until something caught him. A storefront, faded green paint, time-worn edges, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Timber Treasures." Its windows were cluttered with artifacts of forgotten lives, stacked books, tarnished silver, porcelain dolls missing limbs, and rusted tools of unknown origin, a place where the past gathered dust, waiting to be remembered. The people of Alotem. Helen's face brightened with nostalgia. "Oh, Robert, look! That place looks like it's straight out of the 70s. You know how I love vintage things. Let's take a quick peek." He didn't even blink. "You go," he said, already reaching for a cigarette. "I'll wait out here. Dust and junk aren't my thing." Helen hesitated, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face, but she nodded. "Okay, I won't be long." She crossed the street with a graceful ease that Robert had long forgotten how to feel. He leaned against a lamppost, flicking his lighter, the cigarette perched between his fingers. Just another habit that had filled the silence since Emily vanished. But as the flame danced and died in the breeze, his gaze wandered toward the shop's display window and froze. There, nestled amid the clutter, was a pair of rollerblades, pink and turquoise, scuffed, worn, child-sized. His breath caught like a punch to the gut. His hand trembled. The cigarette dropped. It couldn't be. His eyes didn't blink. The memories didn't hesitate. The bubblegum pink boots, the electric blue wheels, the purple straps that Emily had insisted made her skate faster. It wasn't just a resemblance. These were hers. He had bought them for her 12th birthday. He remembered her laughter, high-pitched and golden, as she skated for the first time on their driveway, wobbly but fearless. For the first time in years, emotion surged through him like a storm breaking dam walls. He moved on instinct, pushing through the shop door, the bell above shrieking his arrival. Inside, dusk swirled in shafts of sunlight. Helen, halfway through admiring a shelf of antique radios, turned, startled. "Robert? What's wrong?" But he didn't hear her. He was already striding toward the counter, where a tired-looking man glanced up with mild confusion. "The rollerblades," Robert rasped, his voice cracking under the weight of years. "In the window. I need to see them." Helen joined him at the counter just as the shopkeeper returned, cradling the skates like relics from another life. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. "Robert," she whispered, breathless. "They look just like Emily's." They weren't just similar, they were hers. And suddenly the past wasn't past anymore. Robert's hands trembled as they reached for the rollerblades. The touch of the scuffed plastic against his skin sent a jolt through his body, a visceral reminder of a time forever burned into his soul. He turned one over carefully, like a relic too sacred to rush, inspecting every detail with an almost feverish intensity. "Size 4, he whispered, his voice hollow. "That's exactly what I bought her, for her 12th birthday." Helen, standing beside him, placed a gentle hand on his arm, trying to anchor him back to reality. Her voice was soft but firm, steeped in caution born from too many false hopes. "Robert, please, don't do this to yourself. There must be thousands, tens of thousands of rollerblades that look just like these. It's just a coincidence." But her words, though filled with love, could not pierce the tunnel vision now closing around him. Robert flipped the blade over and stared at the underside. His breath hitched, his eyes widened. There, scratched faintly but unmistakably into the worn plastic of the toe guard, were 3 letters. E-G-W. Emily Grace Whitmore. He breathed, his voice cracking under the weight of 20 years of suppressed sorrow. "I carved these in myself, on the porch that afternoon, just after we wrapped them." The moment froze. Helen's skepticism dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Her hand, now shaking, reached out to trace the letters. Her fingertips hovered for a second, then landed softly on the carved initials. Solid, real, undeniable. Her voice was barely audible. How is this even possible? How did they end up here, in this little town, thousands of miles from Rockford? The shopkeeper, who had been quietly observing, cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to reassert control over the moment. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone guarded. "No." Robert looked up, eyes blazing with disbelief and urgency. "These rollerblades. They belong to our daughter. She vanished 20 years ago. These were the last things she wore." The man's expression stiffened. He took a step forward and reached out. "I'm sorry about your daughter, truly, but these aren't yours anymore. If you want them, you'll have to pay the listed price." Robert blinked in disbelief. "Are you hearing me? These aren't just rollerblades. They're evidence. Our daughter was abducted. These could lead us to answers." The shopkeeper's voice turned cold, transactional. All I know is what's in my shop. They're vintage. $45. $45? Robert snapped. That's more than I paid brand new. The man shrugged, unbothered. Inflation. And nostalgia sells. Helen placed a calming hand on Robert's arm again. Please, she said gently. What's money? Just pay for them. What matters is that we have them. But Robert's voice hardened. No, these are ours. They were stolen from us the moment our daughter was taken. I'm not giving another cent to get back what's already mine. The shopkeeper's face darkened. If you're not going to buy them, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Robert stood his ground. I'm not leaving without them. In a swift motion, the shopkeeper moved from behind the counter, attempting to physically remove them from the store. Robert clutched the rollerblades tighter, pressing them to his chest like a lifeline. The raised voices, the tension, it spilled out into the street. Passers-by began to slow, curious eyes drawn to the commotion. A uniformed police officer, patrolling nearby, stepped into the shop, instantly assessing the scene. What seems to be the problem here? The officer asked, his presence commanding but calm. This man, the shopkeeper said quickly, pointing at Robert, is trying to steal from me. I'm not stealing anything, Robert shot back, his voice laced with desperation. These rollerblades, they're my daughter's. She disappeared wearing them 20 years ago. Her name was Emily Grace Whitmore. We're from Illinois. The officer frowned. Sir, if you believe this item is connected to a missing persons case, there are procedures to follow. You can't just walk out with them. Robert held up the skates, turning them so the officer could see the initials. Look, he said, voice cracking. EGW, Emily Grace Whitmore. I carved those letters myself, and there's a product serial number right here. If you contact the department in Rockford, they'll find the matching receipt. I've kept it all these years. The officer's demeanor shifted as he leaned in. After examining the initials and hearing the name, he stepped back and spoke into his radio, requesting a check on any missing person case matching the details. A brief moment passed, each second an eternity, before the officer nodded and turned to Robert with newfound respect. Sir, the system confirms there's an open missing persons case from Illinois that matches your daughter's name and timeline. He turned to the shopkeeper. I need to speak with the owner. The shopkeeper's defiance wavered. I'm just an employee, he mumbled. The owner isn't here today. Then I'll need his contact information, the officer said firmly. With clear reluctance, the man reached beneath the counter and handed over a business card. Victor Manson, but he's not going to be happy about this. I'm confiscating these as potential evidence, the officer said, sealing the rollerblades in an evidence bag. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to accompany me to the station to give a formal statement. As they stepped out of the shop and into the bright sunlight, Robert felt something stir within him, something foreign and fragile. Hope. It had been buried for so long that it felt almost painful to feel it rise again. Officer Brennan, as his badge read, walked with them to their car. Just follow me, he said. The station's only 10 minutes away. The Fern Creek Police Department was modest, a small brick building nestled at the end of Main Street. The American flag above the door flapped in the warm breeze. Inside, the air was cool and composed, in stark contrast to the emotional storm swelling in Robert's chest. They were led into a quiet interview room, where the rollerblades now sat, sealed in a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Officer Brennan took a seat and pulled out his notepad. I've contacted our detective, he explained. They'll take your full statement. In the meantime, I need to verify some preliminary details. He looked at Robert with respectful curiosity. Can you describe your daughter at the time of her disappearance? Robert took a deep breath. His voice trembled, but he spoke with precision. Emily was 12. Auburn hair, shoulder length, green eyes. She was tall for her age, about 5'2". She had a small scar on her right forearm from falling off the backyard fence when she was 7. Brendan nodded, scribbling notes. Helen added quietly, "It was June 15th, 1986, a Sunday, around 3 in the afternoon. She was heading to her friend Samantha's house. It was only half a mile from ours. She'd just gotten those rollerblades and was so excited to show them off." Robert finished the thought, his voice heavy with remembered guilt. "We didn't even know she was missing until Samantha's mom called at 5, wondering if Emily was still coming over." And just like that, 2 decades collapsed into the present, opening a door long thought forever closed. The door to the interview room creaked open, revealing a man in plain clothes. He had salt and pepper hair, lines etched deep across his brow, and a demeanor shaped by decades of listening to stories no one ever wanted to tell. "I'm Detective Marshall," he said, extending a firm hand to both Robert and Helen. His grip was professional but not cold. There was compassion in his eyes, the kind of quiet understanding that came from having walked through darkness with other grieving families. "I understand you may have found a new lead regarding your daughter's disappearance." Robert nodded slowly, his gaze locked on the evidence bag resting on the table. "Those are Emily's rollerblades," he said. "I'd stake my life on it." Detective Marshall took a seat, folding his hands in front of him. "I've reached out to the authorities in Illinois. The case files are being forwarded now, but it'll take a little time. In the meantime, I need to hear everything you can remember, start to finish." Over the next hour, Robert and Helen took turns unspooling the story they had replayed in their minds 1,000 times. Every detail was burned into their memories. Emily's excitement that morning, the way her ponytail bounced as she skated off, the silence that followed when she never came back. They recounted the frantic hours, the sleepless nights, the search parties that combed forests and alleys, the tip lines they manned with desperate hope. "I took a leave from work that first year," Robert said, his voice tightening as old grief clawed its way to the surface. "We hired private investigators, plastered her face on every lamppost, every bulletin board, and we never stopped. Never." Helen reached across the table, resting her hand over his. "We lived in limbo," she added softly, "year after year. No closure, just silence." Detective Marshall listened intently, nodding. "And now, 2 decades later, you find her rollerblades in an antique shop in Oregon. It's unlikely, but not impossible." "Can you trace them?" Helen asked. Her voice was hopeful, but fragile. "We're working on that," the detective assured her. "I've already sent someone to look into the shop's inventory records, and we're doing a background check on the owner, Victor Manson." He turned toward the evidence bag and gently unsealed it. Wearing gloves, he lifted the rollerblades from their plastic enclosure, handling them with the care of someone touching something sacred. "We'll dust for prints, check for DNA or any trace evidence. I'll be honest, after 20 years it's a long shot, but it's not impossible." Just then, another officer stepped in with a thin manila folder. Marshall opened it, flipping through its contents, his brow furrowed in thought. "Victor Manson purchased Timber Treasures 18 years ago," he explained. "Before that, he moved around quite a bit. Different towns, never staying too long. No criminal record, but his paper trail is thin. Suspiciously thin." He held up a photo, a DMV image of Manson. A man in his early 50s, thinning hair, eyes that offered no warmth. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. Robert and Helen leaned in, studied the face. Both shook their heads. Detective Marshall nodded. "According to his employee, he's out of town for 2 more days. When he returns, we'll bring him in for questioning." By the time the interviews concluded, dusk had fallen outside the station windows. The fading sunlight painted long shadows across the floor. Detective Marshall walked them to the entrance, his tone earnest. "We'll follow up on everything. We'll check the rest of the shop, too, just in case there's anything else connected to your daughter." Robert nodded, gripping Helen's hand tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. It had been so long since someone had taken his pain seriously, since Hope had felt anything but cruel. But as they stepped outside, that hope twisted into something darker. The rollerblades were real, but that meant Emily had been in Fern Creek at some point, and that truth was as terrifying as it was miraculous. They walked slowly through the quieting market. Helen urged them to return to their Airbnb, but Robert shook his head. "I need to go back," he said, "to Timber Treasures. There might be something else, something we missed." She hesitated, but recognized the fierce resolve in his eyes. "Okay," she said softly, "I'm coming with you." As they approached the shop, most stalls had been packed away, the street quieter now, lit only by scattered shop lights and the fading sun. They spotted the same shopkeeper from earlier, locking up the front door. He looked up, saw them, and tensed, visibly quickening his movements. But before they could call out, Helen pointed. Someone else coming from the alley. A man stepped out from a side door. He wore a worn leather jacket, a cowboy hat pulled low over his face. Robert squinted at him. There was something eerily familiar in the angle of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders. "Looks like the man in the photo," Robert murmured. "Victor Manson." Helen's eyes narrowed. But the detective said he wouldn't be back for 2 days. Why would his employee lie? They watched as the man crossed the street toward a parked black sedan. Another man stood beside the car, and next to him a little girl, blonde hair, braided pigtails, maybe 8 or 9. Robert stiffened. The man in the hat crouched before the girl, reaching out to hug her. She flinched, turned away. Something about the gesture chilled Robert to his core. "She's scared of him," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's wrong." Helen hesitated. "Kids get moody, Robert. Maybe she didn't get the toy she wanted. It could be nothing." But Robert couldn't look away. The way the child recoiled wasn't just stubbornness. It was instinct, fear. The trio climbed into the car and drove away, swallowed by the dusk. Robert turned back toward the shopkeeper, who was now briskly walking toward a nearby bus stop. Without thinking, Robert jogged to catch up. "Excuse me," he called. The man turned. His face soured when he saw who it was. "What now?" he snapped. "The police already got what you wanted." The one who left through the side door," Robert said, panting. "Was that Victor Manson, the owner?" The shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "I don't have to answer your questions. If the cops want something, they know where to find me." "Please," Robert said, desperate now. "Was it him?" The man rolled his eyes and groaned. "Geez, you people just can't quit. No, it wasn't him. It was his brother. All right, you happy? His brother. Now leave me alone." A bus pulled up. The man stepped aboard, the doors hissing shut behind him. Helen caught up to Robert as the bus pulled away. "What did he say?" Robert's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "He claims it was Manson's brother," he said slowly. But why wouldn't he mention that to the detective? Why lie about something so simple? The answer, whatever it was, sat like a stone in his stomach. Helen shivered as a cool breeze swept through the street, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. "Robert, I don't know what's going on with that man or this town, but it's getting dark. We're both drained. Let's go back, rest, and call Detective Marshall in the morning." Robert hesitated, torn between the gnawing instinct to dig deeper and the quiet wisdom in Helen's words. He glanced one last time at Timber Treasures, its windows now dark, its secrets sealed within. Finally, he nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, more to himself than to her. "Tomorrow we get answers." Their Airbnb sat in a quiet residential neighborhood just a few blocks from the heart of Fern Creek, a second-floor apartment tucked inside a beautifully restored Victorian house. It had a pale blue exterior trimmed in delicate white scrollwork. When Helen booked it, the nostalgic charm had reminded her of simpler days, of Emily's laughter echoing through their home, of birthdays and bedtime stories, and rollerblades left by the door. As they approached the porch, Helen touched his arm. "I'm going to run down to that Chinese place we saw. I need something warm, comfort food." Robert nodded and handed her the apartment key. "I'll wait here, smoke a bit, clear my head." Once Helen disappeared around the corner, Robert settled onto the front steps. He lit a cigarette, the tip flaring bright in the dusk, and inhaled deeply. The taste of tobacco grounded him. The ritual was old, familiar, a coping mechanism from years of waiting for answers that never came. But tonight was different. He stared at the darkened sky, his mind tumbling through the day's events. Emily's rollerblades, real, tangible, unmistakable. After all these years, they had re-emerged in a junk shop, thousands of miles from where she vanished. That couldn't be chance. His hand trembled slightly as he took another drag. Could it mean Emily had been here, in this town? Could she still be alive? The thought was almost too dangerous to hold. For 2 decades he had lived in a gray purgatory, unable to grieve, unable to hope. But now that suspended grief had cracked open, and light was leaking through. Driven by impulse, he pulled out his phone and searched for information on Victor Manson and timber treasures. The shop had a sparse online presence, a bare-bones website, a few scattered Yelp reviews, mostly praising its quirky collection, but nothing concrete. No photo of Manson, no personal information. As he scrolled, a movement across the street caught his eye. A small figure stood partially hidden behind a lamppost, her silhouette barely illuminated by the glow of a nearby restaurant sign. A child. She looked around 10 or 11, dirty blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Her clothes were ill-fitting, clearly borrowed or second-hand, too big for her tiny frame. Robert stubbed out his cigarette and rose cautiously. "Hey there," he called out gently. "Are you okay?" The girl hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. Her eyes were large and solemn, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, sir, can you help me? A bad man took my sister." Every muscle in Robert's body tensed. He glanced up and down the street. No one else in sight, no nearby vehicles, no obvious danger. "What's your name?" he asked, lowering himself to her level. "Carla," she replied, her eyes pleading. "Please, no one believes me. I ran away from the orphanage to find her." Robert's pulse surged. Her words echoed through him like a ghost. An orphaned girl, a missing sister. How many times had he begged for someone to believe him, to chase down a lead that others dismissed? "Where did you see her?" he asked softly. "In the market," Carla whispered. "With the man in the cowboy hat. She's scared of him, but she has to pretend she's not." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. The girl with the pigtails, the one who had flinched. That moment outside the toy shop now replayed in sharp detail. "This man," Robert said. "Is he tall, thin hair, wears a leather jacket?" Carla nodded quickly. "That's him. He said he adopted her, but it's not true. He's a bad man." A knot of dread twisted in Robert's gut. He pictured Emily again, how she might have looked, how she might have felt. And now this little girl stood in front of him, desperate for someone, anyone, to believe her. "Do you know where they went?" he asked. Carla nodded. "I followed them. I know where they stay, but I can't do it alone." Robert's conscience waged war with his instincts. Logic screamed at him to call the police, to wait for protocol, but his heart knew the ache of helplessness, The years of wishing someone had acted faster. "All right," he said. "Let's go. I'll help you." He pulled out his phone and texted Helen. "Taking the car for a bit. Something came up. Use your key. Start dinner without me. We'll explain later." As Carla climbed into the passenger seat of his rental car, Robert knew he was crossing a line, maybe a dangerous one, but turning away was no longer an option. They drove in silence, Carla giving directions through Fern Creek's winding neighborhoods. The houses grew sparser, trees loomed tall, shadows stretching across the roads. Finally, they reached a clearing behind a copse of trees, a trailer park, tucked away from view. "There," Carla whispered, "at the far end. That's their camper." Robert parked at the edge and cut the engine. He could see it, an old van glowing dimly from within. He turned to Carla. "Are you absolutely sure? Is your sister in there?" She nodded solemnly. "Please, we have to help her." Robert drew a breath, steadying his nerves. "Stay close, and if anything feels wrong, we leave. No questions." They moved quietly toward the camper van. No sounds, no shadows shifting inside. Robert knocked firmly on the door. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway, his face backlit. Not the cowboy hat man, but the other. The one who had stood beside the black sedan. His eyes went wide at the sight of Carla, then narrowed when he saw Robert. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded. "What do you want?" "My name is Robert," he said, voice calm but firm. "This girl came to me. She says her sister was taken here." Michael nodded, more proof that he was doing his best deception. And for the first time in years, Robert stood face to face with the kind of darkness he had long feared. And finally, the chance to fight it. The man's expression darkened, his posture shifting as his defenses rose. "Name's Mike," he snapped. "And you've got it all wrong. Nobody's being held here. Everything's legal." He turned a sharp glare toward Carla. "This one's a troublemaker. Has been ever since her sister got adopted." "Edit," Robert echoed, skepticism tightening in his chest. Mike nodded curtly. "Yeah, Jasmine was adopted through all the proper channels. My boss handled it. I'm just the assistant." He jabbed his thumb toward Carla. "She can't handle it. Keeps showing up, spinning stories, causing scenes." Carla's small voice cracked open with fury. "Lie! You're lying!" she cried, her face flushed with anger. "You took her, you and that other man." Robert's heart clenched. The passion in her voice didn't feel like delusion. It felt lived, raw. "What man?" he asked, already dreading the answer. Mike sighed with theatrical patience. "My boss's brother. He helped pick Jasmine up. That's all. Everything was legal and documented. Jasmine's with her new family now." It was a perfectly packaged story. It made sense. But Robert's gut churned with unease. Something wasn't right. The tension in Mike's shoulders, the quickness in his tone. He wasn't just defending himself. He was hiding something. "Look," Robert said gently, choosing every word carefully. "Maybe I could speak with your boss, or even just see Jasmine so the sisters can say goodbye properly. Maybe that'll give Carla the closure she needs." Mike's jaw tightened. "That's not happening. Jasmine's not here anymore. She was picked up earlier, taken to her new home." But as he spoke, a soft sound came from inside the camper, a muffled shushing noise, followed by what sounded like a child's whisper. Mike's eyes darted toward the back of the camper. He turned back to Robert. "That's just my kid," he said quickly. "Now look, I suggest you take that girl back to St. Catherine's before you find yourself in serious trouble. Taking a minor without permission? That's a chargeable offense." "And I wasn't trying to." "Trying to help?" Mike barked. "By kidnapping a kid and chasing conspiracy theories? Take her back." Or next time, I'm the one calling the cops." He slammed the door in their faces, rattling the camper. Robert stood in stunned silence, the shadows of twilight settling around him. "He's lying," Carla whispered fiercely as they walked back toward the car. "I know she's in there. I heard her. I felt her." "You heard him," Robert said, struggling between reason and instinct. "He says she's been adopted, and maybe it's just hard to let go." "No," Carla stomped her foot, her voice trembling. "That's not true. She's not gone. I can feel it." Robert didn't respond. He was caught between worlds, between the law and his conscience, between fear and faith, and more than anything, he was haunted by the feeling that he'd heard similar words before, in his own voice, 20 years ago, begging someone to just believe. He sighed and unlocked the car. "Come on, let's figure this out together." Inside, Carla sat rigid, her arms crossed, her chin quivering. Robert looked over at her, suddenly struck by how small she was, how much weight she carried in such a tiny frame. "Carla," he said gently, "I believe you care about your sister. I believe you saw something, but I can't do this on my own. I could get in trouble just for bringing you out here." "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't take me back, not without Jasmine. I promise to protect her." Robert's heart ached. That promise, he knew it too well. He had whispered it to Emily once, long ago. And for 20 years he had lived with the guilt of failing it. He softened. "How about this? Let's grab some dinner, something good. Then we'll decide what to do next." Carla gave a tiny nod, wiping her cheeks. She didn't speak, but she didn't protest either. Robert was just about to start the engine when the camper van's headlights flared on, slicing through the dark. He watched, frozen, as the van began to pull away. "They're leaving," he muttered, eyes narrowing. As the van passed by, he caught a glimpse through the side window. A woman with auburn hair, slightly graying but unmistakable, stood inside, closing the curtains one by one. For a split second, her eyes met his. "Emily," Robert whispered, breathless. He wasn't sure if he said her name aloud or if it simply echoed through his soul. It couldn't be. And yet, the shape of her face, the eyes, the curve of her cheekbone. He had seen that face 1,000 times, in dreams, in age-progressed photos, in the mirror of his own memory. Without a second thought, Robert started the car and pulled out, following the camper at a safe distance. "What are you doing?" Carla asked, sitting up. "I saw someone," he said, his voice cracking. "A woman who might be my daughter." Carla blinked. "Your daughter?" Robert nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off the glowing tail lights ahead. "Her name was Emily. She vanished 20 years ago. She was your age, and we never found out what happened to her." As they drove, his phone buzzed. Helen's name lit up the screen. He tapped speaker. "Robert, where are you?" she said, her voice sharp with concern. "You left a message and you're not answering. I've been waiting." "Helen," he interrupted, his words tumbling out. "I think I saw Emily. I'm following a camper. There's a woman inside. She looks just like her, exactly how we imagined she'd look today." "What?" "Robert, are you sure? Where are you? This could be—" "I'm not sure of anything," he admitted. "But you remember how we used to say she had one of those faces? How even grown up, we'd still know it?" Planchet grinned. "But we do." "Yes," Helen whispered. "Please, be careful. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I have to do this, Helen. I have to know." The signal dropped. The call ended. They were moving deeper into the countryside now, beyond the edges of the map. For nearly an hour they followed the van through dark, winding back roads. Carla stayed quiet, occasionally pointing out turns, helping Robert stay close but hidden. Finally, the camper turned onto a gravel driveway, leading to a large farmhouse-style home set back from the road. 2 stories, wraparound porch, detached garage, no neighbors in sight. Robert killed the headlights and pulled over behind a stand of trees. From this vantage point, he could observe without being seen. "What now?" Carly asked in a hushed voice. "Why are we here?" Robert turned to her, heart heavy. "Because I think I saw Emily. That's why I followed them. And if I'm right, then everything I've been searching for is in that house." Carla's eyes widened. "You think the bad men took her too?" "I don't know," he whispered, "but I intend to find out." He looked back toward the house. The camper had parked by the front steps. Mike stepped out. A woman followed, holding the hand of a little girl. Carla gasped, her voice a trembling whisper. "That's her. That's Jasmine." And now, finally, Robert knew this was no coincidence. This was the unraveling of a truth buried for far too long. "That's my sister," Carla whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and urgency. Her small hand gripped Robert's sleeve as they watched from their hidden vantage point. As the woman stepped into the halo of the porch light, Robert's breath caught. She was tall and slender, her auburn hair shimmering in the soft golden glow, so much like Helen's, like Emily's had once been. Her every movement radiated a quiet elegance that stirred something buried deep in his chest. It wasn't just resemblance. It was something deeper, something instinctual. Then another figure emerged from the camper van. It was the man in the cowboy hat, only now he wasn't hiding behind its brim. In the full brightness of the porch light, Robert saw his face clearly. Recognition struck like a lightning bolt. Victor Manson. The bastard lied, Robert muttered under his breath. Mike said he was out of town, but he was with them the whole time. And the girl, Jasmine, had been in the van too. Every word they'd spoken was a lie, and if Victor had hidden that, what else had he covered up? What else had he done? If that woman truly was Emily, what kind of horrors had she endured all these years in silence, under the thumb of a man like Manson? Robert's fists clenched. His first instinct was to leap from the car and storm the house, to drag answers from Victor Manson himself. But logic quickly cooled his rage. He was outnumbered, likely outgunned, and he had Carla with him. She was just a child. Recklessness could mean disaster. He reached for his phone to call Detective Marshall. No signal. His heart sank. They were too far from town, too deep in the woods. He was alone. And then, a sharp knock on the driver's window nearly made him leap from his skin. He spun to see Mike's face, twisted with fury, inches from the glass. "Stay in the car," Robert whispered urgently to Carla. "Lock the doors." He cracked the window just enough to speak. Mike's voice was venom. "You followed us? What are you, some kind of stalker?" Robert forced a calm he didn't feel. The girl just wanted to see her sister. "I thought maybe if we talked." "You're trespassing," Mike cut him off, "and you're done. Both of you are coming with me, now." Robert's hand hovered near the ignition. "I don't think that's a good idea." Mike's hand moved under his jacket. The bulge at his side left no doubt. It was a gun. That wasn't a request. Robert's blood went cold. His instincts screamed to run, but Carla was watching him. He couldn't afford panic. "All right," he said slowly. "We'll come. No need for trouble." Carla stepped out reluctantly, and Mike herded them toward the house. As they approached, Robert scanned the layout, vehicles, exits, anything that might be useful later. "You're making a mistake," Mike warned. "The boss isn't going to like this." "I just want to know the truth," Robert replied, pulling Carla close. The front door opened before they reached it. Victor Manson stepped out, his face a portrait of seething fury. "Who the hell are they?" he barked. feeling. The guy was watching the house, Mike answered, and he's got the brat with him, Carla. Manson's eyes settled on Robert, narrowed with suspicion. And who exactly are you? My name is Robert Whitmore, he said, voice steady. I believe you have something, or someone, that belongs to me. Before Manson could answer, the auburn-haired woman appeared behind him in the doorway. She froze. Her eyes locked onto Robert's, a flicker of recognition, confusion, pain, fear, and something like hope moved across her face. Sirens cut through the air. Mike swore and grabbed his radio. Boss, we've got company. Cops. They're almost here. Manson's face contorted with rage. How did they find us? Robert didn't flinch. My wife must have called them. She knew I was following your van. The woman, Lena, continued to stare at Robert, trembling. Get inside, Manson barked. But Lena didn't move. Emily, Robert said. Her real name. The name buried beneath years of silence. Her lips parted, her breath catching. The sound of her name seemed to shake something loose inside her. Lena, now, Manson screamed. But she stood her ground. You're really my father, aren't you? Impressive mental and physical strength. Robert's eyes welled. Yes, Emily. We never stopped looking. Never. Manson's voice turned to ice. Lena, I'm warning you. I can't do this anymore, she said, louder now, tears rolling down her cheeks. It's over. Manson raised his gun. You did this, he snarled at Robert. You turned her against me. In a blur, Emily lunged. A struggle, a scream, a deafening gunshot. Robert flinched, expecting to feel the searing pain of a bullet, expecting to watch his daughter collapse. But when the dust cleared, it was Manson on the ground. Blood pooled beneath him. Emily stood trembling, a smaller pistol in her hand. Her own arm was bleeding, a grazing wound from the scuffle. Without hesitation, Robert kicked both guns out of reach. Moments later, the front door burst open. Police officers flooded the room, weapons drawn. Everyone down. Robert dropped, pulling Carla with him. Mike was tackled and cuffed. Paramedics poured in. They rushed to Manson, still breathing but fading fast. Then to Emily, who collapsed into a medic's arms as the adrenaline bled away. Robert stood a few feet away, frozen, daring not to believe. After 20 years, his daughter was here, real, alive. The hospital buzzed with life. Machines beeped, voices murmured, footsteps echoed down sterile halls. Robert sat in a hard plastic chair outside the treatment room, his hands shaking in his lap. It felt surreal. He'd sat like this once before, waiting to hear news after she'd disappeared. That time, there had been only silence. No, there was hope. Detective Marshall approached quietly, his face lined with fatigue, but his voice steady. Mr. Whitmore, he said, your daughter's going to be okay. The bullet grazed her arm. She needed stitches, but no surgery. Robert exhaled, tears slipping down his face. And Manson? He asked. In surgery. The bullet missed his heart, barely. They're trying to stabilize him. Robert nodded slowly. He didn't care what happened to Manson now, not really. Because behind that hospital door, his daughter, Emily Grace Whitmore, was alive. And the next chapter of their story was about to begin. What about the girls? Robert asked, his voice gravelly with fatigue. Carla and Jasmine are in the pediatric wing with Child Protective Services. Detective Marshall replied gently. They're physically unharmed, but understandably shaken. Robert rubbed his hands over his face. The adrenaline had worn off, and exhaustion hit him like a wave. So much had happened in such a short span. His mind reeled, trying to process it all. Helen had arrived at the hospital about an hour earlier, breathless and frantic after tracking him down with the help of local police. When Robert hadn't returned or answered his phone, she called 911. With the rental car's GPS data, they were able to trace his location to Manson's property just in time. She was now downstairs in the hospital cafeteria, picking up coffee for them both, her way of staying grounded when everything around her felt like a storm. Just then, the treatment room door opened. A doctor stepped out with a warm, reassuring smile. "Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. We've finished her stitches. She's stable and resting." Robert's heart pounded as he entered the room. Emily lay on the hospital bed, propped up by pillows. Her arm was carefully bandaged, her skin pale but her expression serene. She looked up as he entered, her green eyes, so much like Helen's, searching his face. "Emily?" he whispered, pausing at the foot of her bed, afraid to move too fast, afraid to shatter this fragile moment. "Dad," she said, just one word, but it cracked something wide open inside him. He crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, taking her uninjured hand with trembling care. "I never stopped looking," he whispered, tears finally escaping down his cheeks. "Not for a single day." Emily's own eyes brimmed with tears. "Victor told me. He said you and Mom were dead. He said no one was looking for me." The door opened again. Helen stepped into the room, balancing 2 coffee cups. She froze mid-step. "Emily," she breathed, her voice breaking. "Mom," Emily said, the word so small and fragile, it carried all the lost years in its echo. Helen dropped the cups without even noticing, rushing to her daughter's side. She embraced her gently, mindful of her injuries. They clung to each other in a tangle of sobs and relief, the 20-year silence between them collapsing in a heartbeat. Eventually, a gentle knock came at the door. Detective Marshall stepped inside, notebook in hand. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said softly, "but we need to begin documenting the case. Ms. Whitmore, or would you prefer we use another name?" Emily sat up a little straighter, her voice clear despite the tears. "My name is Emily Grace Whitmore," she said. "He called me Lena, but that was never my name." Over the next hour she recounted her harrowing story, how a stranger, a man posing as a helpful bystander, had tricked and abducted her, how she had been drugged and stuffed into a truck, then driven across state lines, hidden in false compartments, isolated for years. "Moved constantly," she explained. "We never stayed long. He used back roads, no addresses. He taught me how to disappear." "And timber treasures?" the detective asked. "That was his base," she nodded. "It's where he stored things, sold stolen goods, kept multiple identities and fake documents." Ellen, sitting nearby, listened in horror, her fingers gripping the armrest. "Did you ever try to escape?" Emily's eyes lowered. "I did. A few times. When I was little. But he'd punish me. He told me you were dead, that no one cared, that I'd be put in jail if I got caught." She paused. "Eventually I gave up. I stopped hoping. It was the only way to survive." Detective Marshall leaned forward, his voice careful. "When did he begin calling you his wife?" Emily hesitated. "When I turned 18. He started taking me around, introducing me as Lena, his shy, obedient wife. He kept me isolated, but occasionally he'd show me off." "And Jasmine," Helen asked quietly, "why did he adopt her?" A shadow passed over Emily's face. She tightened her grip on the bedsheet. "A few months ago, I overheard him. He said, I was getting old. He said he still wanted me, but he needed someone younger, a fresh bud, he called it." Helen turned away, her hand to her mouth, silent tears running down her cheeks. They found Jasmine through a contact, Emily continued. I don't know how they arranged the adoption, but it wasn't legal. Victor avoided paperwork whenever possible. Detective Marshall's voice hardened. We'll be launching a full-scale investigation. If there was any corruption at that orphanage, we'll uncover it. And Victor? Robert asked, his voice tight. He's in critical condition, but alive, the detective replied. He'll be charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, weapons possession, and attempted murder. And that's just the beginning. The men took Brenda into the bathroom, followed by one of the detectives. The men pointed to a large jump in front that looked like a jump. A gentle knock at the door preceded a CPS worker entering, followed by Carla and Jasmine. The girls have been asking for you, the worker said kindly. Carla ran to the bed, stopping short to avoid hurting Emily. Are you okay? Did he hurt you bad? Emily smiled gently through her exhaustion. It's just a scratch, sweetheart. I'll be okay. Jasmine peeked shyly from behind Carla, her voice a whisper. Are we going back to the orphanage? Before anyone else could answer, Robert spoke up. Actually, I wanted to ask about that. He turned to the worker. We're not in a place to adopt right now. We live out of state and there's a long process, but I want to help, financially, and I want to make sure these girls end up somewhere safe, somewhere loving. Emily reached out and took Carla's hand. You saved me, she said. Without you, I might never have found my family again. Carla beamed. You saved my sister, too. The CPS worker nodded. We'll explore all the options. And any financial support would mean the world to their future. That evening, the hospital room buzzed with motion. Officers came and went with updates. Doctors checked Emily's wound, and Helen made phone calls to family members back home, sharing the news no one ever expected to hear. Victor Manson had survived surgery but remained in intensive care. Mike and 3 other men linked to his network had been arrested and were already cooperating. The web of his crimes was wide, spanning state lines and years. And yet, amid all the chaos, the Whitmores had found each other again. In 1930, when the room finally quieted, Robert sat beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, aged but still his daughter's, was peaceful. It was a peace he hadn't seen since she was a child. Helen sat across from him, her hand resting lightly on Emily's bandaged arm. She whispered, 20 years. I never thought we'd see this day. Robert nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Thank you for making me go on that trip. All it had taken was a pair of rollerblades in a dusty window, and the courage of a little girl who refused to be ignored. They had lost so much, years of birthdays and holidays, the daily joys of growing up, but now they had a second chance. The road ahead would be difficult. Emily would need therapy, healing, patience, but they'd face it as a family. Outside the hospital window, stars flickered in the night sky. Robert remembered how Emily used to make wishes on the first star each evening. Tonight, he didn't need to wish for anything. The miracle was already here, sleeping peacefully beside him. Finally, after 2 decades of darkness, Emily Grace Whitmore was home, where she had always belonged.